And I was always told that you'd be disowned. They did go that far. They'd say you'd be disowned if you choose to do that kind of thing. We've got so much lost time that you just can't say, okay, now we're going to have a relationship. Of all my reunions, I see a theme of nobody knows what to do with me.
Linda grew up in a family with an older brother who was also adopted. As a child, she took the blame for a lot of things that weren't in her control. She experienced many layers of reunion, but has found healing in writing to work through her story and her feelings. Here is my interview with Linda. Were you adopted from birth, and where were you adopted from?
Well, I would say that, 3 months down the road is when I was adopted. So that wasn't my next home. A foster home was the next home after relinquishment. And yes, that was from a maternity home where my mother was, my birth mother was. And I think the hospital was actually connected to the maternity home in a strange way. And so that's where the adoption agency was kind of walking through that whole procedure of from relinquishment to the foster home and then finally to, my adoptive home 3 months later.
So was your adoption through like a religious organization, or was it just a private organization?
It was a religious organization, yes.
And did you grow up with any other siblings in your adoptive family?
I did. I came into the family after they had already adopted a son, and he was 2.5 years older than me. And he was adopted from the very same adoption agency, and we were still in the same city where I was adopted from.
So how did you find out you were adopted, or was that something that you had always known?
Yeah, I think it was kind of pretty much standard procedure at the time that the kids were told pretty much from the get-go, and I can have a vague memory of being about 4 years old and hearing the strange story of not being from my mom's tummy, which produced a lot of questions from me to my mom and my adoptive mom. And from that point forward, it was a taboo subject, and I quickly learned that that was not going to be talked about other and beyond the fact that, yes, you and your brother are adopted from separate families, and that was it. That was the end of the conversation. That was all we were going to get.
So in your book, you talk about the idea of grafting as it relates to an adoptive family, kind of like seaming you guys together as a family unit. Do you feel like that was accomplished by your adoptive parents at all?
Oh, gosh. Well, and first of all, thank you for reading The Gathering Place. You really did read it. And the grafting, I thought, just really resonated with me because it's this idea that we can just simply pluck a infant and put it into a family of strangers, and that we don't have to tend to it thereafter because this baby is a blank slate and they're just going to be just fine without any other thought of how to well tend, and actually for a baby to thrive, not only survive, but to thrive. And that's the same in nature. There are special things you have to do to graft a different plant onto another. So I just thought that was a really good analogy.
Yeah, I liked that, especially in a family where there's more than one child that was adopted, to kind of be able to bring everybody together as a family unit. It takes some time and some care and some effort.
Yes, much more beyond just the acceptance day of here you are in your new family and think that you just close the book and walk away and everything's just going to hum along perfectly. That's just really absurd because it needs to be tended to on a daily basis. And if you don't, then there's the failure to thrive, which happened to me several times throughout my life. I didn't know that at the time, but looking back now, I surely do.
So what was it that made you want to start looking for your birth family? And was there any reason that it was an important time for you to start searching?
I hear this question a lot, and it makes me think of the doctor's name is Dr. David Brzezinski, and he specializes in adoption. And he was asked this question about why do adoptees search, or do all adoptees search? And his answer is yes, they do. And if you think of it on a spectrum of we may not all go out and go to the extremes that I did to find my birth family, but just by simply looking in the mirror, an adoptee saying, where did I get my eyes from? Why do my eyebrows look like that? Why am I prone to liking to write or to sing, whatever? We all search in our own ways, whether we go whichever extreme we go to.
So did your adoptive family ever express to you that they would be supportive of you searching?
Oh, they absolutely told me they would not be supportive of me searching, and that would be grounds for, I don't know if they ever said we'd rehome you, but there was the attitude of that's just not going to be acceptable. Let me answer that first question. You asked me when I knew I was going to start searching, and I think I knew that moment at 4 years old when I was told that there was someone out there that gave birth to me, and it became very important to me from that moment forward to try to find my birth story and to find out who I am and who I was going to become. And it just was very important to me from the get-go. And I think my parents knew that, and it distressed them quite a bit. And I was always told that you'd be disowned. They did go that far. They'd say you'd be disowned if you choose to do that kind of thing.
So I'm guessing they didn't provide you with any information before you started searching, any documents or anything?
No, they didn't really have anything other than an adoption decree, and that didn't give me any information other than now my adoptive parents being named as if I were born to them. They didn't really have the info is the answer to that question. I had to go find that on my own, independently of anything they ever shared with me.
So you ended up meeting your birth father first. How did you find him?
It was like finding a needle in a haystack. Oh, it's such a long story. But I did meet him first. And the funny thing about, well, not funny, but kind of ironic, is that I got a rejection, but with a warm smile and a warm hug. He wasn't angry. He wasn't frustrated. He, like I said, gave me smiles and hugs, but just adamantly told me he was not my father. He wished me well, and I walked out and never saw him again. Only to find out years later, when DNA comes around, that yes, indeed, he was my birth father, and I got to hug him one time.
Do you think that he knew that you were his daughter and he just didn't want to admit that?
I do. And I can't speculate of why his reasons were that he didn't want to claim me even after I was 24 at the time. But his father was still alive. He was from a Catholic family. And I'm speculating it may be that at that point of the road, he wasn't willing to upset the apple cart and let his whole family know about me. He just felt it was easier to deny me and never own up to it. That's all I can say.
Did he seem like he wanted to be helpful at all to you and your
Absolutely
search?
not. No.
Okay.
He could have helped me in that meeting because I kept saying, what is my birth mother's name? And he kept saying, I only did it to help out a friend. I put my name on your birth certificate to help out a friend. And I said, well, what's the friend's name? And he said, I don't even remember what her name was. And so that was it. I had to find her completely on my own too.
So did he have any other children before or after you? And was he married when you met him?
I don't know. At the time, I didn't know if he was married or not, but it came to be that he was divorced. And then later, I did find out that I have one half-brother paternally from my father, from my birth father. And he's about, I'd say 5 years younger than me.
Have you met him?
I have, yes, several times.
And you still have a relationship with him?
Yes. I wouldn't say it's a tight bond. And I wouldn't say that we have like a million things in common, but we definitely wish each other well. And there's like some happy birthdays and hey, Merry Christmas, that kind of thing. But I don't think of all my reunions, I see a theme of nobody knows what to do with me. We've got so much lost time that you just can't say, okay, now we're going to have a relationship.
Right.
It's just lost time that you can't, like, okay, now you're going to be my brother. Oh, now you're going to be my sister. Neither one of us have been able to bridge that gap of now where do we go from here?
Yeah, it's like building a foundation from nothing when you're already an adult's difficult.
Mm-hmm. True.
So how did you find your birth mother then?
Even more difficult, needle in a haystack. She had used a pseudonym throughout her entire pregnancy at the maternity home, which I find ironic because I wrote both of my books under a pseudonym. And I used that for a reason, for anonymity. I didn't want my adoptive family to find out. There wasn't time to repair the relationship before they would pass. And I'm still happy that I used a pseudonym. But isn't it crazy that I did exactly something similar that, I found a useful tool, and apparently she found it a useful tool to put a fake name on my birth certificate. So when I had my birth certificate in my hands, it had a fake name on it. So then what was I going to do?
Yeah.
So I went to some drastic measures to find her true name, and I did finally meet her. And I've had so many layers of reunion over decades now, and I'm not even sure I'm finished yet. But it's been an interesting journey, that's for sure.
Did she have any other children before or after you?
She did. She had two. She had two after me. And one son she kept, and the other one she gave away to a next door neighbor. And that neighbor officially adopted that son. And I've never met him in person, but we are in contact. And I am also in contact with the son that she did keep.
So he grew up with the next door neighbor. Did he know that he was adopted?
After the family adopted the son from my birth mother, they moved away and did not see my birth mother again, maybe ever. I don't know that they ever saw each other again. He knew he was adopted, but he didn't know from where.
So when you met her, did anyone know about your birth and adoption?
No, she had to finally fess up and tell the son she kept that, hey, you have a sister and she's coming here to California to meet us.
Wow. So what was it like the first time you spoke with her? Was she happy to hear from you?
Yeah, I believe she was. It was very emotional. And Miranda, I've learned so much now about what birth mothers went through, especially in the 60s and 70s and even present day. I'd never put enough credence into the grief and the trauma they go through. And I met a person, my birth mother, who was so traumatized, I believe she was still the age she was at the time where she relinquished me. I don't feel like she had emotionally matured one day past that. And so I took it as her inability to be honest with me. But honestly, what I think it was is she didn't know how. She had blocked the trauma out. She truly didn't remember who the birth father was. And our relationship fell apart after a few years because, again, we didn't know what to do with each other. We didn't know how to build a relationship. And it came to be that she really wanted me to take care of her. And, oh boy, I'm not in any age or ability to do that.
So you had moved closer to where she was shortly after meeting her. Was that a coincidence or was that intentional because you wanted to have a relationship with her?
Well, it was kind of twofold, meaning that when I went out to meet her, and I lived in Oklahoma at the time, I went out to California, Southern California, and it was obviously, I would never change anything about meeting her because that was really important to me, and it still is. But once I saw California, I thought there is no reason at all why at 24 years old that I can't move there. So I moved, and it was kind of, yes, because of her, but also because that's where I could see me starting my life. And at that time I was in advertising, and so that was a really hotbed of activity of, being in an agency in Southern California.
Sure. So there was like multiple opportunities you could see.
Exactly.
So did you have any expectations about how your relationship might be or what might happen?
Yes, and the way I'm going to answer that is that many adoptees have a very rich fantasy life. And that's because of the closed records for most of us and the secrecy of where you're not able to explore your adoption story. So what do? You make crap up in your head of what if she were this person? What if she were this actress? We all have really interesting fantasy stories of who we speculated our birth family and mother to be. And so when you meet the real thing and reality bumps up against your fantasy, that can explode and implode. And it can be a very disheartening or, it's just not what you thought it was going to be. But after I dealt with all of that, kind of a disappointment, really, because my birth mother didn't look like me, talk like me, walk like me, have my favorite color. There was nothing that I could go, oh my gosh, look at this. But I did get different things from meeting her and the other people in my bio family that I wouldn't ever change. I would never not find them. But I've just found other things to be true in my life of what I really gleaned from the whole situation was much different than what I thought it was going to be.
So you said that you didn't look like your birth mother. Did you favor your birth father then?
Actually, I do. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you had mentioned that your reunion has come in waves. So you met both birth parents, and it didn't really go very far with either of them, but you've had the chance now doing DNA to connect with some extended family members. Who were you able to connect with, and how has that been?
That's actually been terrific. And that only happened about 2 years ago. So just when I thought I was never going to find out anything more about my adoption story, DNA comes along. And even then, I wasn't the first one in line to spit in a tube. It took my daughter to take a test, and she did it for entirely different reasons. But she said, Mom, there's some people showing up on my report that I have no idea who they are. And so right then I just went stone cold thinking, oh my gosh, unexplored territory. So I quickly got my test and was able to identify and match that, yes, that long ago birth father that I met that said he wasn't, indeed was. And I had missed him by 2 years. He had passed just 2 years shy of me finding this or doing the DNA report.
Wow.
But since then, I've been embraced by my entire paternal family. And they're mainly first cousins because all my aunts and uncles have passed away. They were a lot older than my birth father was. And I am very close with a lot of them. They've been very welcoming. And even have gone to the point of apologizing for my birth father, saying, we can't imagine why he'd do that. He was a real nice guy, but we apologize for why he would reject you like that. I thought that was really, they didn't have to do that.
No, that's very kind of them.
Mm-hmm.
Were they able to give you any other insights on who he was, a little more about his life?
Yes, they were unable to tell me anything about my birth story because no one knew. No one knew on my birth mother's side. She didn't share it with her sisters or brothers, and the same with my birth father. He had 5 other siblings and told no one. So they were all pretty mystified when I pop up. But they were able to tell me things like he was a drummer, so he was musically inclined. And I do have a singing background, so I kind of felt like maybe that matched up. And there are other things that, mannerisms and characteristics that they were able to share with me, and they were very open about wanting to share that with me. But the biggest thing is they're always like, come stay with us. They live in California, and even though I moved out there, I've since moved back to Oklahoma. But I always have a place to stay if I want to go visit in California.
That's awesome. So do you still have any relationships with anyone from your adoptive family?
Well, both my parents have passed now. And my adoptive brother actually passed 2 years before my mom and dad did. So that kind of really makes me the Lone Ranger. There's a couple of aunts, but here's the thing about adoption. Another thing is that just because your adoptive parents claim you as their child, you have to get other people on board too, like the grandparents, the aunts and the uncles and the cousins.
Yeah.
They always looked at us kind of sideways, like, where did you foreign kids come from? And so I never had any kind of bond with any of them. So I truly am the Lone Ranger. There's no one left from my childhood adoptive home.
Did your adoptive brother ever search for his birth family?
No, he never did.
He didn't want to?
He was of the opinion that if they didn't want to know him, then he doesn't want to know them.
Yeah, I've heard that one a lot.
But unfortunately, my brother was very avoidant and used distractions in his life to keep him from dealing with his trauma and never dealt with his issues. And he had an early death as a result through addiction, and just the body keeps the score. And his body just said, we're checking out. That's enough. And he had an early death.
That's a shame. I guess you can only hold so much.
Yeah, I believe so. We think our bodies are just going to keep going and going and going until one day it says, no, that's it. We kind of gave you some warnings. He had a heart attack 2 years before, his fatal heart attack. And the doctor said, if you don't change your lifestyle, you're going to have an early death. And that's exactly what happened.
How do you feel like your life has changed after meeting your birth families?
Boy, again, it's just come in so many different layers of the early days when I was 24 and had found them. I really was holding everything on the fact of just finding them. And I hadn't matured enough to be able to process all of that and what it meant. And so I kept bumping into my own psychological walls throughout my life where I didn't understand my trauma and I hadn't dealt with it yet. And so, but once I did start dealing with it, and then I was writing to heal and wrote 2 books, it just changed my life in ways that I couldn't imagine. But I had to face everything first to be able to unravel and then reconstruct in a healthier way.
In your book, you took the time to go through some experiences that you had earlier in life and address how, looking back, maybe you carried the burden for things that weren't necessarily in your control. Is that kind of how you felt growing up?
Oh, definitely. Yes. Like being overly responsible to hold other people's emotional well-being, or I still am challenged with that, and I recognize it these days, and I'm able to have talks with myself about why I shouldn't do that and find a different way to think of things. But very much feeling responsible for being adopted. Like being adopted was my fault. Or being a bad baby, the reason my mother didn't want me. All those implicit core beliefs that we hang on to, and we think of them as truth until we really take it apart and say, is that my responsibility? And once I started doing that, I could separate from my core beliefs and tried to say, is that even the truth? And once I was able to say, no, it really isn't. So then I pivoted and went a different direction to where I'm trying not to own those things that are not mine to own. Mm-hmm. It's made a big difference.
Do you think writing the book helped you to forgive yourself and forgive others in your life?
Yeah, definitely. Writing to heal is a very scientific, real thing of just putting into paper and getting your emotions out on paper, whether it's, book worthy or not. It's still a healing tool to say, just to get whatever angst or beauty that's inside you on paper. It just makes a whole difference. And by writing those books, I've been able to, well, now I no longer hide under my pseudonym. People know now that Linda is Emma, and Emma is Linda. I'm reclaiming Emma as being part of me. And so many collaborations and relationships and new beginnings have happened as a result of me walking into this truth and of my true self. It's just been invaluable.
So when you started using the pen name of Emma Stevens, you feel like you were trying to kind of be anonymous with your adoptive family, and now you feel like you can finally be your whole self and not hide from that? Is that kind of what it is?
Yes, yeah, and I know I'm not the only adoptee or other person in the world that has used a pseudonym for different reasons, but it definitely was a tool for me to have a voice. And let me just say, it was like a do or die for me situation of, by choosing to go ahead and have a voice, that meant I was choosing life. And if I were to keep it bottled up for one day longer, it was going to be choosing death. And I don't mean to sound too dramatic, but it really had come to the pressure points of those were my 2 directions. And using the pseudonym helped me protect my adoptive family, but yet have a voice at the same time. And I have to tell you, it worked. Now I'm at a stage of my life where they have passed, and I'm able to speak freely. And while I've forgiven myself and my family for things that have happened, there's also a point of needing to claim it and say, this really did happen. All of these things happened. And now I'm the only one standing that can even say what did happen, because they're all gone.
You've written 2 books so far. Do you plan to write more? And if you do, will you use your real name?
I am in the middle of writing my 3rd book, and I see it as being sort of the trilogy. I want to sew the 3 books together to be like, 3 parts of one and the same. And I will use Emma Stevens because now I think of her as not only the writer part of me, of Linda, but she's also my brand name. And I worked really hard to give Emma a brand name. So I will do that, but I'll make it very clear that, Linda is the true writer and Emma's my brand name.
Okay. So what would you tell people who are entering into the journey of reunion? One thing that you had mentioned to me that really stuck out was about the therapists.
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
So you basically gave the advice of, be very careful, kind of who you trust as far as a therapist. So what advice would you give people who are entering into the journey of reunion?
And that really is even an adoptee that's maybe first coming into their adoptee consciousness, or what some people call coming out of the fog. The first thing we say is make sure you get support. Make sure you have a mentor or a counselor or therapist. And then I have to raise my hand and say, but be cautious. Make sure you interview your therapist, counselor, or even a mentor, anyone you put on a pedestal, beware. Because if they have a private agenda about your life that is not therapeutic and not within the therapeutic boundaries, then you're putting your hands into, some dangerous territory. So just please be careful to make sure you're in a safe place. But I do support counseling so much. It was the only way I was able to get where I am to this point now. But I did indeed make a serious mistake of choosing a therapist back in my 30s that was almost the end of me. And that's what my second book, A Fire is Coming. That's what that's all about. It's a cautionary tale of choose your therapist wisely.
And choose an adoption. I'm sorry, I'm like blanking on the word right now.
Oh, an adoptee competent therapist?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even that, you have to make sure that what their idea of being confident and adoption is what your meaning of that is.
Right.
Because they could have a different spin on it. They could be an adoptive parent and have a whole different idea of what an adoptee needs. The best thing, if you can find it, is an adoptee who is an adoptee competent therapist.
Yeah.
That would be ideal. But let me just say, I have neither. I have two therapists right now. Neither one of them are adoptees or have the certificate of being an adoptee therapist, adoptee competent therapist. But yet they are so schooled in trauma and recovery and great outcomes, almost like post-traumatic recovery. What do they call that? Post-traumatic growth.
Okay.
That's what they're all about, is the growth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they work for me. But if you can, try to get with people that understand with the same understanding that you have.
Yeah, so it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. You have to find who works for you.
Definitely. Yeah, that's for sure.
So do you have any events coming up for your book?
Yes, I will be at Untangling, and that's in April. And before that, I'm going to they call it the Tucson Festival of Books. And I guess they've been holding it since 2009. And I'm part of the adoption cohort of adoptee authors that I'm really excited about because it's led by my editor, and I've never met her in person. So wow. I'm really excited to meet her in Tucson in March. And I've been named an Indie Author of 2024, so that's exciting too. To be recognized is always nice.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Do you have anything you wanted to add?
We covered a lot of territory. I would say for any adoptee that is wanting to know more, because all of us come to this, stage at different attitudes and understandings, try to do your research on topics, try to read books, try to listen to podcasts, and start forming your own opinions of what you think about what your adoption feels like to you, and try to realize it's not your fault and you should be able to talk about your adoption story. And it's not meaning you're ungrateful or selfish or you hate your adoptive family. None of that is true. We had no part in being relinquished or being adopted. So
yeah, that's all very, very true.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for letting me do the interview with you.
Well, thank you, Miranda.
If you have experienced an adoption reunion and would like to speak about it, please contact me at whathappensafterpodcast@gmail.com. Also, check out the show's Instagram to see pictures of my guests. Listen next time to find out what happens after. Thanks for listening.